Hey everybody, hope you're having a good week. What we're going to be covering today and a little bit, later on is that we're going to be getting into some HTML, a bit of CSS, and start dipping into dynamic web services. So we're going to get a basic look at Ruby, Ruby on Rails, not PHP until probably the week after, but basically we're going to start kind of looking at how all of these server-side technologies work together. Now, last week, I had you start working on a little bit of web development. You made some basic websites, and I didn't really give you too much information on HTML because I kind of wanted you to look that up on your own and start getting a feel for it. And what we're going to be going over today is how HTML documents are structured, how we can make them look pretty. Um, Not going to spend too much time on it because honestly, it's outside a lot of the scope of the class. I want you to get a feel for how it all works, obviously, and you need to have that knowledge in order to make websites. But we're not necessarily going for you to become incredible web designers. That's more separate topics. Architectures is almost more back end, just to kind of set expectations. But you do need to understand what it is, how it all works together. And let's talk about that here. So this is going to be probably broken up into a few videos just to keep things, a little bit tight. But with HTML, we have some interesting kind of historical perspectives and where we're at today is really, at least I find kind of interesting because HTML has evolved significantly over the years. Now, one of the really interesting things with this is not only has the language evolved, but how people use it has evolved. Even though the tags, the elements within the language are still there, the meaning of them has semantically changed. And this kind of gets into things that we'll talk about way later in the class with topics like the semantic web and how we search and things of that nature. So just kind of setting context for you here, how we structure web pages can actually have a pretty significant effect on the underlying architectures. So what I'm going to be going over here, we're going to talk about HTML a bit. I'll try not to butcher the acronym too much. Um, we're going to be looking at some of the other technologies that kind of build upon it, the meta languages, how they're structured. We'll look at HTML5 because that's the current version. That brings a lot of really powerful features that really make websites extremely powerful today. And we'll dip into CSS, and that's mainly going to be demo focused. We'll be getting into Bootstrap and responsive design pretty soon, and you're going to see that there's a lot that can make go into styling web pages. But let's start with this topic called SGML. Now, this is basically a meta language that describes HTML. And this is a very computer sciencey thing, whether you like it or not, I suppose. There are languages for describing other languages. So SGML basically lays down the rules for how a HTML page is rendered or how it's supposed to be created. Now, to kind of, I suppose, step back a touch, HTML, XML, SGML, all these acronyms that you're getting here, these are all markup languages, so they're not proper compiled programming languages. Basically, the way it works from, say, the browser's perspective is that it's going to load in an HTML document. If we're talking about HTML, it will parse it out line by line and basically just translate whatever is there to what you see in your browser window. Again, there's no compilation. It's not necessarily doing multiple passes to check if you screwed something up with your coding. It's just going to plop it out there. Um, that's why if you ever get on Reddit in the programming humor area, people make fun of HTML programmers because you're not programming. So, we're getting into semantics here. Just to set, kind of expectations. But SGML, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but basically this is going to be a meta language which tells us how we can write HTML. It's going to tell us how we can specify different levels of the document. So you might see the DTD acronym in various places. This is basically how strict we want to be with our HTML markup. Not something that you see a lot of websites do these days, but for quite a while, you had to specify very strict HTML code. And this was part of your SGML markup in your documents. And what this would get you is you'd get one of those pretty little verified by the W3C meets current specifications badges on your webpage. If you go back about 10 years and you see little like HTML5 verified, CSS3 verified badges, that's basically saying whoever wrote this document conforms to the standards. And that means that in theory, it should render fine in all browsers compatible with this version of HTML. You don't see it as much anymore because it's assumed that you're writing good code. Not everybody will, but it's kind of a relic from a different era, at least to me. So what I would kind of do if I were you is I'd read up a little bit on SGML just to see what it is and where, what it's doing for us. We're not going to be super concerned with it, other than the fact that this is what constructs HTML. And I've got a nice little link here for you to check out too if you want to kind of go through it. Basically, it talks about how SGML will structure the HTML tags. So how do we define images? How do we define tables? How do we make a div? How do we create block elements versus inline elements? This is all laid out in SGML. But again, this is more of an aside for you to kind of dig through. Now, you might be asking, okay, well, you've been talking about tags and elements and all this fun stuff, and I've never written an HTML page in my life, which is fine. A lot of people have never created a website. It is very common these days to have some experience with it, whether you have intentionally set out to do it or not, I suppose. Even if you've made a web page for a course, or if you had to make some kind of a document where it gets translated into a web page, you probably have made one. But the idea with these types of markup languages is they're going to be tag-based. So you have a set of elements that comprise a web page. For instance, you start with the HTML tag at the top, and probably you're going to have a head block, then the body, close the HTML. Everything in between is going to make it look pretty, or at least fill it with content. And that's your page. And you're going to see these elements kind of spread throughout. Now, typically HTML is going to have an opening and a closing tag. So it's going to be angle bracket, whatever the tag is, whatever is inside the tag, closing. So basically the closing is going to be a slash in there. So if we were writing a paragraph block, for instance, this would be bracket P. This is the content, close bracket P. Okay, that is your paragraph element surrounded by tags. I'm going to jump ahead a touch here. So I'm going over to JS Fiddle to do a quick demo here for you. Let me zoom in a bit here. So this is a nice site where you can really quickly get rendered code, like testing if you want to share code snippets. You can also use CodePen. You can use your own computer. I'm just going to use this for a change of pace. But just to kind of tell you, like what, I guess, visualize what I was just talking about, I can do something like hello world and run it. And down here, I get my preview. If I wanted to add JavaScript, if I wanted to add cascading style sheets to make it pretty, do that here and here, output here. But basically, all I'm trying to show you here is opening tag, closing tag, content, right? So this is a paragraph block, something we'll dip into a little bit later. I could also make this a span. Looks slightly different. You might have noticed it shift up a little bit. That goes into how this particular element is styled by my browser. Basically, it has become an inline element over a block element, as I can now do something like this. Hi there. Bye there. Let's actually make it bye there. So the difference, inline element versus block element. We'll get into that very soon. I guess the point is opening and closing tag. We'll come back to this. So you're going to see a lot of this, basically, if you've never done HTML. So, bit of alphabet soup for you here. My new favorite term for web technologies and acronyms. Yeah, it looks like we're at 10 minutes, so I should probably move along here. We have a bunch of different acronyms to deal with. SGML, this is how we're specifying our documentation. It's the meta language. We can write HTML with it, but it's a little bit more verbose. Now, HTML is kind of subsumed by SGML. XML is a tree-based format which has the identical structure to HTML, tag-based essentially. But the difference is that XML is usually describing data of some kind. Now, HTML has very rigorously defined elements. So there's the paragraph, there's the div, table, every single element we could consider. XML is completely up to you. It is a data storage format where it's basically tree-based. So I could have an XML page that describes a person. So at the top of it, it would be angle bracket person. One under that would be maybe a name block. Under that would be age. Under that would be any other attribute we want, right? And the idea is that it's up to you to parse that out. I'm not going to really get into XML too much, but if you ever need to store data, sling data across websites between services, XML is one way to do that. JSON would be another one. We'll probably use that more because it's a little bit easier to parse out. XML, you need to do tree parsing, gets kind of annoying. All right, we also have XHTML, which basically combines these two. And then HTML5 is the newish, I've got ish because it's been around for a while and it's currently, we're developing the next version. But this brings us a lot of new technologies. The goal was to unify XHTML with HTML, but really the big features are that we have lots of multimedia tags now, video and audio and things that we would have had to have brought in a Flash container for in the past. So we are basically at HTML5 as of time of this recording. So to give you a view of how these all fit together, we have SGML as kind of the big, block that is the father or parent, I suppose, of all of these. XML is based around SGML, or kind of subsumed by it as well. We get HTML out of that combination of SGML and XML. We get XHTML, a whole bunch of other acronyms as well. SVG, just to talk about it, this is basically how we draw in the browser. SVG is a vector-based format. Fun to play with, kind of outside of the scope of class, but idea here is to give you a feeling for how these all relate together. Honestly, we are mainly just going to be doing HTML5 plus CSS3. So, 13 minutes so far, at least if I haven't cut this up too much. Let's talk through some demos, and then in the next video, we'll go through some of the different tags that we can have. All right. So just to look at XHTML, this is where, again, we're kind of unifying XML and HTML. At the top, we have a doc type. So this is a holdover from SGML, where we're specifying how strict are our tag requirements. And again, just to kind of talk about this briefly, again, it's more of a historical thing. If we are following the strict formatting, you have to be absolutely rigorous with your tags. Every opening tag needs a closing tag. If a tag doesn't have a closing tag, you have to put a slash angle bracket. Example for that would be an image. Let me pop back over here. Let's say img src equals, oh, we need a good image for this, right? Let's do something live. Nothing wrong with a live Google search in a recorded video, but paste. Okay. So what I'm doing here, again, popping ahead to a different tag, this is going to have an image. Now, the source to the image is a link elsewhere on the internet, but the point is that here is my closing tag. I'm not doing an image and then a close image. I'm enforcing that it's being closed in a single point here. And then we've got my Obi-Wan Kenobi right here, looking very excited to say hello there for the millionth time on the internet. But basically the point is that if I didn't have that ending slash, I probably would fail verification and I wouldn't get my nice little shiny badge that says I'm a good web programmer. So doc type, now in HTML5, we've seen this has changed slightly. It's a lot simpler now. We're just saying this is an HTML document. We'll get to that soon. All right, so then we have the rest of our page, opening HTML, closing HTML, open head, open title, close title. This is what you see in your header of your browser. Body, this is going to be all your content. Here we have a paragraph. Again, every opening tag has a closing tag. Very strict, verbose, easy to parse out. Now, HTML5 simplifies this. We just have doc type HTML because that's all the browser cares about. Exact same content otherwise, only real difference is this starting tag up here. Now, just to kind of bring this all together and why we care about this, every browser is responsible for parsing HTML. So whether it's HTML4, HTML4 strict, HTML4 flexible, honestly, I've always used strict. There's like 3 or 4 different data type definitions for how strict you want to be. But the point is that your browser will parse out HTML and render it however it feels like. Now, if you're using Firefox versus Safari versus Edge versus Internet Explorer versus Chrome versus Chromium, these are all separate applications that can be used, right? And one thing that you might care about is how it looks. The simplest way to make sure that browsers will at least try to render a page similarly is to specify, an HTML4, the document type, or an HTML5 that this is an HTML document. The browser can then parse out all of the tags with that in mind. And why am I saying that? All pages look the same, right? Several years ago, every browser had different standards for rendering documents. If I have a page that looks great in Internet Explorer because that's what my company uses internally, I can guarantee that some of you that are still, in industry probably have legacy applications that only work in Internet Explorer. God forbid Internet Explorer 6. But these browsers can interpret tags differently. Maybe this paragraph tag has a bigger margin or it's got a different font size. This is something which you might have to be concerned with. So the websites that I was going to use to test apparently are either down forever or not working, but basically there are places where you can go on the internet where you put in a URL and it will give you a screenshot of what it looks like on every single browser, every single operating system, every single computer type, and you will get a feel for, hey, this looks great on Windows and Mac, but it looks like garbage on Linux. Why is that? Well, maybe we screwed something up in our styling and our tags. Point is, you have to kind of start being concerned with multiple users. Anyway, what I'm going to do now is we'll end the video here, and I will do some tag demos, and we'll go through that in the next video. Bye.